Autistic children have senses heightened to a point that we don't understand.
Having an autistic child is a wild ride, I have to say that. Incredibly frustrating, incredibly exhilarating sometimes, very stressful on a couple.
Yes, sir, please, ma'am. One for the master, one for the day. One for the little boy who lives down the lane. Baba, black sheep, have you any work? Yes, sir, 3 extra.
He had been so good. We thought, oh, he's such a great kid. He doesn't cry too much, and he's not noisy. He just, goes about his business. And then all of a sudden you think, well, geez, he should be making more noise. He should be talking to us. He should be asking for things, and he wasn't.
No, Jordan. He was just using us. He totally ignored us unless he wanted a drink or wanted to be fed. And even then he wouldn't talk to us. He would just motion for us to do it.
We were getting very frustrated. And, by the whole thing. I remember taking his head, my hands like this, and saying, Jordan, look at me, look at me. And he would look up, he'd look down, he'd look everywhere, but he wouldn't look.
There was no emotion from him. There was no hugs, no kisses, nothing. It was like having this thing around the house that you just had to look after. He wasn't even as nice as a dog, because at least a dog will come and lick you once in a while.
Going through a regular child's growing is nothing compared to what we go through every day with our son. You can multiply that, I think, probably more than 10 times, and you might come up with something close to what we go through all the time with our child.
Eric at one point didn't communicate at all. Like if he'd sit down on the floor and start screaming, and it might be because he was thirsty, but the babysitter doesn't understand. It's really hard when they don't communicate.
It's been a lot of stress.
Keith and Yvonne Rushton traveled all the way from Labrador to Toronto looking for help for their 3-year-old son, Eric.
Really was at the start.
I guess it's kind of a gross way to put it, but our little guy was like a walking zombie. He had no facial expressions. He had no interest in anybody. He couldn't differentiate between, a live person and an object. There was just nothing there. He was just in his own little realm. He never hugged us. No communications, nothing. And everyone we went to told us the same thing, that he would probably be like that for the rest of his life.
When he was born, there was no hint that there was anything wrong with Eric. As he grew, his behavior started to puzzle his parents. By the time he reached 3, Eric had grown into a silent, withdrawn youngster who froze out his family and made absolutely no effort to speak. Eric had all the classic symptoms of autism.
Well, there's no reason for it. Autism happens, it just happens. Like there's a hereditary autism, and then there's another, from what I understand, I've read umpteen books, then another type of autism where it just happens. It's really hard to explain. Like you can't just define autism in one word.
Hi, Eric. Hello.
Autism means aloneness, and scientists suspect that it's a coping mechanism gone terribly wrong.
He didn't play with toys. He didn't make any noises at all. You could go up to him and scream at him, and you'd get no expression at all, nothing. He'd just sit there. You could bang pots and pans by his ears, nothing.
Paul Madaule is the director of Toronto's Listening Centre. His work with autistic, dyslexic, and learning disabled children grew out of personal experience. As a child, Paul was both dyslexic and learning disabled. He knows what it's like to be lost and confused in a terrifying world that makes no sense. That's one of the reasons he's able to draw these unresponsive children out of their isolation.
Autism is a breakdown of communication. It's a problem of communication. Communication with the world around, communication with oneself as well. These children have function, they have, we know that the system, most of the system, sensory system, work, but they do not seem to be used for the right purpose. They don't seem to be working together. Sometimes when I have to explain to parents what's happening with a child, I will say that if the different senses were musical instrument, with a child, this instrument lack of conductor. They are not able to play something together which permits you to move towards higher function, particularly language function.
For Steve and Darlene, having an autistic child meant never being able to do anything as a family. Jordan, the little boy in the black shirt, was uncommunicative and often violent.
Okay. See you, Jordan. You never knew what was going to set him off. He would be happy one minute and he'd be watching TV. He used to be a TV junkie. All he would want to do was watch sing-alongs, videos, and as soon as it would end, he would start screaming.
This is Jordan at 2½. Except for screaming during his temper tantrums, he was completely nonverbal. Sometimes Jordan would just explode for no reason. His mother knew that his behavior wasn't normal. But none of the doctors would believe how violent Jordan's tantrums were, or that they went on for 45 minutes. Finally, Darlene picked up the video camera.
Every time he would get angry, he would just smash his head on the floor or smash it against the wall. And if you ignored him, he would do it more. He would follow me into the next room and smash his head some more. And Jordan was just there. And this thing that would scream, and he would hurt the other kids. He'd bite and scratch, and he would headbutt you in the mouth and in the nose, and he hurt a lot of people. You know, you'd take him and you'd want him to talk to you, say, Jordan, you know, kiss mommy, I love you. And it was just, you know, he'd headbutt you or scratch you or try to bite your lip or whatever. It was really hard. And you go through such emotional highs and lows. He'd learn to say one word and you'd be so happy, and then 5 minutes later he'd smash his head against the wall and, you know, cut himself, and then he'd be so depressed. It's so frustrating because the doctors told us he would never get better. He might have to be institutionalized. He might never talk. And there was no light at the end of the tunnel. It was just doom, doom, doom. And I kept thinking, what am I going to do when he's 16 and bigger than I am?
Jordan's violent tantrums continued. His parents realized that specific songs set him off. He'd cover his ears and scream in pain and rage, trying to block out the sounds that he found so excruciating.
I think there is something which is really common with most autistic children, is that they are more sensitive than us. Listening, for me, is a step number 1 of communication. People can hear but do not communicate. If we want to communicate, we have to be able to focus.
Have you seen a crocodile? That's the parrot. No, it's the dragonfly.
This is Jordan at 3½. He's learned to read, write, and speak in the last 6 months. And all because he's gained control over his sense of hearing, and thereby found his voice.
Our senses are there for 2 purposes. One, which is to permit us to absorb the world around us, to receive the world around us, communicate, learn, etc. But the sensory system has another one, which is also very important, is to protect ourselves from those stimulation. What seems to be not working with those children is this regulation between one extreme, the reaching out, or one function, and the other. They seem to have the two mixed up. There is no balancing between the two.
Here's Sarah Henry Godfrey at 4.5. Being unable to sort out sensory input isn't something one outgrows. Autistic children grow up. Autism comes in many guises. For Sarah, it means a speech impediment and extremely sensitive hearing. She has an uncanny memory and acute visual perception. Almost 17 now, she lives with her parents, Glenn and Leslie.
You do a good job, right? You do a very good job. Do you think we're having a next sewing year?
Sarah copes by making a routine out of life. That way she knows what to expect and when to expect it. Unexpected things, like snowstorms that keep the bus from running, upset Sarah.
We're very lucky. Sarah is one of the only students in our area who gets upset when the buses don't run. She likes school.
What buses, Darren?
When the buses don't run in the winter, that's when you get sad. I think you're the only...
Teenagers.
Yeah.
All teenagers. Darren?
For 11 years, Sarah was bounced from doctor to doctor. No one could help her deal with her heightened senses or give her parents a clear definition of autism.
We've heard everything from profound communication disorder, complete withdrawal, to a form of brilliance, even. Her perceptive abilities, I think, are enhanced in that she can hear things that normal people can't hear.
She was terrified by the sound of a telephone, for example. And there was no reasoning with her. The fact was she was frightened, so we had to do something about that. Reduce the volume of the phone, remove it from her area, and help her cope, and now she'll talk on the phone. So it's been some progress.
Jim?
You didn't like that at all.
No.
Glad to come to work in the morning. Congratulations, Sarah.
Although Sarah's world is different from that of most people, she still leads an active life. She's an award-winning high school student with a close circle of friends who appreciate her unusual qualities.
Yes, I did, Sarah.
Sarah has an exceptional memory, particularly for dates and what happened on those dates. And as long as I can remember, Sarah would be able to tell us what had happened 3, 4, 5 years before, things that we had long forgotten. And a wonderful example of this is that she was a big Robert Munsch fan for a long time, and I found an old Robert Munsch calendar in a remainder bin at a bookstore, so I bought it for her. It was the preceding year. By then, Sarah was in the habit of writing sort of a mini journal on a daily calendar that we bought her for the current year. Well, this was the preceding year's calendar. I gave it to her. She spent an entire weekend filling in the events of every day, of every month of that preceding year, things that we had forgotten entirely. And when we chat, you know, back in my date book or with friends, she was absolutely dead on as to what had happened and where we had been and what had, and even what people had worn.
There's Sarah. So Mrs. Hamilton's son. You just did a trick.
An unusually powerful memory is often associated with autism. When autistic children are normalized, this remarkable trait often disappears.
Oh my goodness. Can you tell us more about school?
As with many autistics, Sarah's extraordinary memory goes hand in hand with her heightened senses.
They are more sensitive than we are, but they are more cut off than we are because of the fact that they are more sensitive than we are. Again, we go back to the sensory system being the two extreme. If you are too sensitive, you are going to develop mechanisms to cut off even more. The problem is that the cutoff do not reduce your sensitivity. There are holes. There are holes in the system. For example, in most of the sounds the children are sensitive to, they are continuous sound. Okay? The difference between rock and roll music that they can hear very loud and the sound of the vacuum cleaner or many of the sounds, air conditioning, they are just continuous sound. These are the sounds which seems to set them off. These are the sounds they suffer from. It seems that the incredible mechanism of protection is not capable to take into account those very continuous sounds.
I remember when she was 4, maybe 5 years old, being inside the house in the winter with music on the stereo that was quite loud and conversations going on, and then trying to talk to her, and she reacted really strongly, wanted us to be quiet so she could hear the airplane. And of course we couldn't hear any airplane, so everyone was quiet. We turned the stereo off, opened the door, and listened really carefully, and we could hear a small plane somewhere in the distance. But she heard that through everything, and that's one of the key times when we came to realize that there was this tremendous ability to hear and a disability when it came to filtering information and discriminating what was important, what wasn't.
Listening is really to find the fine balance between the reaching out and the protecting ourselves.
Even for those with normal hearing, the world can be a noisy place. For autistic children, trapped alone in a frightening, confusing cacophony of meaningless sounds, the retreat into autism may be a protective form of tuning out. Since they can't listen, but can only hear, they'd rather hear nothing at all.
The difference between hearing and listening is not unlike the difference between seeing and looking at. One is purely physiological. It just comes to you. You hear even if you don't want to. Okay? It's totally passive. The other one involves the desire, the motivation is a much more psychological act. You want to look at something, you put your eyes together to do it. You want to listen to something, you have to put your ears together and do it. And imagine, remember the dog, you know, the ears straightening up. Well, this is the difference between hearing and listening. They are hearing, they're doing their things, then there's one sound which seems to grab them, and up the ear going to go up, the body posture is going to change. Well, to a lesser extent, a more discreet way, we are doing just the same.
At the time of birth, the neural circuitry between the ear and the brain is already in place. The newborn sense of hearing is fully developed and plays a significant role in forming a bond between mother and child.
Almost from birth, she was a very poor nurser, and that's one of the classic signs. She didn't speak at all until 18 months, and then it was 1 or 2 or 3 words. And my story is a really common one and a really sad one, is that I couldn't get anyone to accept that there was something wrong. And I would always hear the same old line, well, every child develops differently, and you're worrying too much or overprotective and so on and so forth. But I think parents know when their child isn't connecting with them, and it's hard for me to explain it in any other way except that you're looking for a connection, maybe an eye contact or touch in particular, and she would pull away when I would try to cuddle her. So that, and I didn't have a whole lot of experience. She's my only child, but I knew it wasn't right.
Treatment works best if started as soon as possible. By the time Sarah was finally diagnosed, she was already 12 years old, and her behavior patterns were well established. Sarah suffered the fate of many autistic children because no one really knew what autism was.
But I've heard everything from the refrigerator mother theory, which was the original theory, which postulate that was Dr. Leo Kanner, who first came up with the term autism, and he speculated that it was a result of uncaring parents primarily, and so the child withdrew because the child wasn't getting the affection and the attention that he or she needed.
I think it's now well proven, and it's something that I see day after day in my clinical experience. This whole idea that autism might be something having to do with the mother is really absolutely not true. In fact, I think the mother of autistic children that I see are the most dedicated, and I would say mother and fathers are the most dedicated people that I have ever met.
As dedicated and loving as these parents are, they still need answers, and medical science has little to offer them.
Gonna bring you a blue Power Ranger? A new ramp, all for your truck. You gonna get a new truck ramp?
While searching for effective treatment for Jordan, Steve and Darlene were repeatedly told that there was nothing to be done, and they should look for an institution for their son.
3 Mighty Max?
No.
No? How many Mighty Max? 4 Mighty Max? Oh.
What it all boils down to is that no one knows what causes autism.
Now the prevailing theory seems to be that it is indeed genetic, because they've been studying the structure of autistic brains, and they're fairly certain that they know that the brain is different and that it happens prior to 28 weeks.
Conception may be the moment when the child sets off down the road to autism. Although it's rarely apparent at birth, these children may carry a gene that causes sensory receptors in their growing brains to either miswire or misfire. No one's sure which, but the search for that crucial malfunction seems to lead back to the womb.
The ear is the first sensory instrument to be really operational before we were born. 5 months, at 5 months of prenatal life, the acoustic nerve, which means that the nerve which connects the ear and the central nervous system, and when I say the ear, not only the auditory ear, but the ear which integrate movements as well, the same nerve, is myelonized. Myelonized means that it is able to carry the information. And by the way, it is the first myelonized nerve in the human body, which means that there is something there which give a kind of a precision, a precedent. It seems to start with the ear.
Recent research has changed the way we see unborn children. The womb is not nearly as silent, isolated, and cozy as we previously thought. Dr. Thomas Verney is a perinatal specialist.
By the age of 6 months, that unborn child can hear perfectly well. The auditory system of the baby is certainly developed, fully developed, as well as yours and mine, by the age of 5.5 to 6 months after conception. In other words, three months before the baby is born. And secondly, that the baby can hear everything inside the womb, that there's no great loss of clarity. Now, a lot of people thought that because the baby is surrounded by amniotic fluid, and outside of the amniotic fluid, of course, is the mother's womb, and outside of that is, of course, the abdominal cavity and skin and fat, that the baby would be totally in this isolated chamber where no sound would ever penetrate. Well, this is simply not true. The baby can hear very, very well. There is probably a loss of about 20 to 35 decibels in strength. But you and I are speaking here now at about 60 to 65 decibels, which means that the baby has no trouble hearing.
Perhaps living in such a noisy environment traumatizes the fetal ear and short-circuits the development of listening. Autism is not caused by an emotionally cool refrigerator mother. It probably has other causes. Scientists are now certain that the time spent in the womb is at the heart of autism.
We can imagine, with a little bit of imagination, what can be the atmosphere, the sound environment of in utero, in the womb. Certainly a lot of noises, which are continuous, a kind of background, loud background noise. And I think any human being would like to find a way to hear something else. If you are in a car which is very noisy, in a very noisy highway, and you cannot close the window, what you're going to do is to put the radio on, and you're going to focus on something much more agreeable to hear. The thing is that in utero, the child doesn't have the possibility to put the radio on. It's going to have to do with what he receives. And what can he receive? It's perhaps another type of sound which comes and go, which is not always there, which is the voice of the mother. The voice of the mother is going to be heard as something very tiny, behind, if you want, all those other noises. But we can imagine a kind of dynamic of expectation and gratification when it comes, expectation when it's not there, a kind of reaching out, a kind of imagining the ear trying to get there and grab, you know, like the tongue of a frog, grabs this sound, which is in fact the first intent to communicate.
And that's the goal of the therapy here at the Listening Center. To make the children want to reach out from behind their sensory shells, to ignite their desire to hear. Autism takes many shapes, and not everyone will benefit from the Listening Center's therapies.
When he has a temper tantrum,
In order to evaluate the suitability of the child, Paul does a
when he's mad
detailed
and screaming,
assessment
he's yelling
by interviewing
something
both the
sometimes,
parents
we don't
and the
understand
child.
what he's screaming at.
Things are going to come.
Paul screens the children very carefully and only accepts those whom he feels he can help.
And you will see
Based
him
on parental
having
feedback,
some kind of
he has an 80 to
conversing,
90%
which
success
is very
rate.
basic, using words.
Toad went to Frog's house. He found a note on the door.
If the
note
child
said,
is
"Dear
accepted for
Toad,
treatment,
I am not
the mother's voice is recorded
I
reading
went
a
out.
short, simple
I want
story.
To be alone. Alone, said Toad.
After the recording has been made, the sound is fed through a series of filters, which remove all the low frequencies, leaving only a harsh, strident buzz. This buzz is an octave above the top note of a piano. Every room in the Listening Center has a tape player and a machine known as the electronic ear. The electronically filtered voice is played to the children through headphones. While they listen, the channels are pulsed from treble to bass and back again. The tiny muscles of the middle ear respond by tensing. These aerobics help the child focus its listening. Paul believes that this process reproduces the way sounds are heard in the womb. Eric has mastered focusing his ears and is now choosing what he wants to hear. He is no longer a victim of sound.
Okay, Jordan. Okay.
At the Listening Center, Jordan covers his eyes when the headphones are put on. He doesn't know which sense is picking up the electronically filtered voice of his mother.
What is interesting is what we observe this mother's voice is doing when we give it to those children. Very, very quickly they become more focused, more interested. Something particularly interesting they do, they become more physically affectionate. They grab their mom, they go and sit and touch them. Sometimes they don't want to even leave her, which is something very different from what these parents have experienced with their autistic child.
Paul told us it would happen in this way. He said right after he does the session, he'll be a little out of sorts for a week or 2 weeks. He may do some high-pitched screaming or yelling or babbling, and he did. He was experimenting with his voice. He was learning that, oh, I have this voice, I can communicate, this is how it works.
Paul said when we go home, he's going to start screaming around the house, and his sleeping patterns will change. And he's always been a really good sleeper. But sure enough, he started getting up in the middle of the night wanting to play, and he was happy, but he just wanted to play. And it'd be 2 o'clock in the morning, and he'd be sitting on our bed, jumping around, wanting to play, and we just couldn't believe it. But he just started talking, got happy, and I think a lot of the frustration problem was that he couldn't talk. And I think as soon as he was able to speak, he wasn't as frustrated anymore.
After a couple of weeks went by, something new would happen. He would say a new word or a new phrase, or he just wouldn't react the same way to when you said no to him.
Jordan responded very quickly to the therapy at the listening center. How long it takes the therapy to work depends on the individual.
After this phase of highly filtered sound, music or voice, we are going to bring the person down to earth, down to this world again, by defiltering little by little this sound, both mother's voice and music. During the process of filtering, the storyline that the mother is reading is going to appear, and the child is going to be able, at one stage or another, to recognize it. We will be able to observe in the way they relate in the family, they relate to the mother in the next few hours and few days, if it has been recognized. Very often the children very simply say, "Oh, that mom." Our work at the listening center is certainly not a cure, it's facilitation for the process of communication. We help the children to open the way of communication, to facilitate other therapy, in particular speech and language therapy. We really work on the first step towards the opening of the child into the world.
Try it. There you go. You can get it.
I think that the listening center has one of the few approaches to childhood autism which really works. If there was a delayed development in the central nervous system, or if there was interference in terms of communication with the mother, either in terms of too much or too little, then certainly trying to kind of recapitulate the developmental process, but this time in a correct way, and at a time when the central nervous system of the child, of course, is much more developed than it was in utero, combined with the attention that the child is getting, combined with the counseling that the mother is receiving, I think all these things together make for a very successful and very intensive form of therapy, and I'm not surprised that it works. I'm not quite sure how it works, but I think these are some of the ingredients that go into explaining why it works.
I want the C, please.
No, I want C.
I want the C.
No.
Come on.
For Jordan, the work begun at the listening center continues at home with Frank Fanuzzi, an educational community support worker. Frank's goal is to frustrate, aggravate, coax, and cajole Jordan just enough to get him upset, and then give him the coping skills to control his temper.
I dumped.
We're going to take turns this time.
Give me it.
What's the magic
Give
word?
me the puzzle, please.
Sure.
I remember.
Using tough love and toys, Frank reinforces Jordan's language skills.
What's the E for? My turn.
Oh,
Come on.
I'll put the E.
All right. E for what, though?
Elephant.
Okay. H for... Oops.
Harmonica. Give me number 12.
No.
Give me number 12.
I'm going to put it in. Do you want to help?
Since autistic children have great difficulty differentiating themselves from their environment, they often speak in the third person.
You finished.
I finished.
I finished, remember?
I finished.
Put that in here.
It's as if they don't really belong to themselves or know where their physical boundaries are. Because their senses work individually, but not together, these children can't get a feel for their environment or for their place in it.
I'll dump it.
I'll bump it.
Why?
I'll dump it.
Do you want to dump it?
Yeah.
What's the magic word?
Can I dump it, please?
Sure.
It's dumped.
It's dumped.
Let's try and fix it. I'll put this one here.
In the playroom, the headphones never come off. While listening to their mother's voices, as well as to music, the children participate in play therapies and do artwork. In fact, much of the art on the Listening Center's walls was done by the children. Many of the pictures share a powerful use of color and line. Some drawings reflect the austerity of being cut off from the world. Others reveal a heightened visual sense and an obsession with detail. The drawings of the center's youngest artists are often representative of things that they find fascinating. Things that most of us would never notice. This mask was made by Sarah, and this is one of her paintings. Does Sarah see the world this way? Autistics have reported that they get lost in a glittering, shimmering world of minutiae, such as dust particles.
If one day we discover the way those people perceive, I think we will have made a major discovery in understanding what the sensory system really does. Those people, autistic children, have a lot to teach us. And I think it's one of the reasons there is so much interest in trying to understand them. It's still one of the mysteries of science. We just don't know, and we have the intuition that if we knew, we will know much, much more. It will not only help them, it will help us.
Sometimes I really don't like being autistic. I find things difficult and frustrating when people aren't changing things around. I don't like having to wait a while to do what I have to do. I find it hard to get in the swing of things. I have found 2 subjects a bit hard, like English and math. I really don't like math. I have taken it for a few years. Banking is really hard for me. I did it in my 2nd year of high school with Monica Muckenfoss. I'm doing it again this year. Counting money is very hard for me to do. I hate being an autistic person. I didn't want to be born with it almost 17 years ago. It can be a bad life. I want to be like other people.
As the parent of an autistic child, you go through the denial phase. It's a grieving process in a sense. It's like the death of the child you expected that you would have, and then a gradual acceptance of the child that you do have. And I think that's really, really important for her as well, to acknowledge that, yes, I am autistic, this is what autism is. And she has every right to feel angry and to feel that she got gypped somehow. And I'm really glad to see that in her. It doesn't make it any easier for us, and it's certainly tough for her right now. But that's something we're going to have to go through and say, yeah, this is the reality of your life, honey, but let's cope with it the best way that we can.
And I think there is more and more, and that I like, the belief that those children have potential. They are perhaps not able to tap into it fully, or they do not tap into it the way we would like them. We, the school system, or system or society, want to like them to tap into it, but that is not a proof that they do not have potential. They do.
Sarah's diary is a record of her relationships with her friends. It also records Sarah's struggle to come to terms with her autism. She meticulously records every detail of a life that her mother describes as that of a woman child. The posters on her walls represent that life. Beauty and the Beast vies for attention with Raggedy Ann. Caught between Mickey Mouse and Madonna, her life may not follow along the path to marriage and family. Her frustration and longing to be normal may be a blessing in disguise.
I think what the program should do is to bring the child to a point of openness that he or she wants to be part of the world around. And it's going to suffer from it. I mean, it's going to be a lot of frustration, a lot of awareness that there are some differences. But this is going to be a motivation, and particularly when those children reach adolescence, when they want to be like the others, where they want to have boyfriends and girlfriend relationship, this is going to make the extra effort to be part of the group. And I have seen it working so well with some youngsters. And then we can help them with some of the weird behaviors they still have. We can help them to control it in a certain way, to make it more socially acceptable.
Eric is in the early phases of treatment. He's just starting to verbalize, and there's still a long way to go. His parents, however, are delighted with his progress.
He plays with toys now. He never played with toys before. His neurologist just couldn't believe the changes in him, because this neurologist that we were seeing, he basically told us there was nothing for Eric, right? And now he's saying, gee, there's some stuff happening here.
He can shriek now, and he natters a bit like Baba and Mama, and that's basically the extent of his speech right now. But even just seeing that from where he before was not making any kind of outward sign that he even knew what was going on around him, it's just great.
Now when he wants a drink, it's just, well, for me it's a big deal. He'll open the fridge door and point to the milk. Oh, this is great, Or if he wants a banana now, like the way I've set my house up now is I have everything in the same place all the time. Like certain closets, like my cupboard has crackers in a certain cupboard, so he points to a certain cupboard and I know he wants crackers. But it's a big deal, because before he'd sit there and scream and I'd be pulling out all this stuff. Do you want this? Do you want this? Do you want this? But now he can actually point and show it to me in that, which is such a big relief.
It's like an explosion almost for him. He's really coming to grips with the world around him. It's opening his world up. And it's really unbelievable to see that going on, and you can see it going on within him.
For Jordan and his family, life is close to normal. Jordan seems eager to get on with a life of his own.
The doctors still tell us he's autistic and there's no cure. And Paul says in 2 years, the word autism will be a faded memory. So I tend to believe Paul because everything he said has come true.
I remember when we first started with all these things we're doing, I'd come home every day and ask the question, how was your day? How was school? And wouldn't get an answer out of him. Now I get an answer. That was my litmus test. Come home and say, how was your day, Jordan? How did it go today? I mean, we'd come home and he wouldn't go, hi, Dad, hi, Mom, hi, anything. Now it's, hi, Dad, how was your day? Did you go to work? Was it fun? Did you drive? That's a turret of questions. Where'd we go?
Well, that's what you wanted.
That's what I wanted.
Okay, backflip, guys. 1, 2,
Power Rangers! Hi-ya! Now we think maybe he'll be an accountant or something. He's very thorough, whatever he does now. If he's putting something away, it has to be put away properly. He's very, almost too thorough, but, that's okay. If that's his only fault when he gets older, is he's too thorough, I don't think I'll complain too much.
So Jordan, now things are normal. It's nice. We went out for brunch the other day. It was great. All 3 kids, everybody ate and they walked around a little bit, but no real problems. We're starting to do normal things. It's been really good. And now I'm thinking, in a lot of ways, he's exceptional. I mean, he's got a phenomenal memory. He just doesn't forget anything. I think he's going to be perfectly normal. I think he's going to fit into society and just do what other people do. But there's a part of me that's holding back, saying, geez, he's got these interesting traits. He's really agile. He doesn't forget anything. He's already doing his letters, and he's reading now. I mean, he's in junior kindergarten, and he's starting to read. And he's really, I think he's going to be fine. And I think he might surprise us. I really think he might surprise us.
I'm delighted to hear that those youngsters, after they've gone through the program, have a very strong ego, because I think that is what was missing when they started. Why didn't they have this ego? Because they could not put themselves together. And as soon as we can put the sensory system together, as soon as they can feel that they are a body different from the space in which they are, different from the people around them, they are going to start building on this ego. And this ego is going to be the motivational engine, which is going to permit them to move on and on and on. And step by step, frustration after frustration is going to permit them to grow and adjust to society.
It's not a fairy tale living with autism. And there was a time in my life when I was in my angry phase that my child was autistic and my child was going to have a difficult time, where I would imagine, daydream even, about life without Sarah and how wonderful it would be. And now I can't imagine life without her, because she is a special child, and my life is rich, her life is rich, and we're a really strong family because of what we've gone through together. Sarah's reality was as valid as my reality, and until that point, I had struggled with Sarah because I wanted her to live my reality. And we clashed, and I was angry because she wasn't the child I thought I would have, and she didn't see the world the way that I saw the world. And I really felt that she should, and I kept trying to force her into that. Once I realized why Sarah did some of the things that she did and why she thought the way that she did, I thought, well, I have to accept who she is. I have to meet her where she is and try and understand that. And once I learned to do that, and I'm still learning to do that, it was so much better, and our relationship is just so much more positive. I really like my kid. I really like who she is. I'm glad to be her mom. It's not easy, but I'm really glad she's mine.